Hello, BookTube. I thought I might try a new feature here on the channel, Monday Morning Report, where I look back on the reading that I actually did during the weekend. Sort of a companion to Friday Reads, only what really happened instead of what I was thinking might happen or partially thinking might happen or whatever. It's an idea that was suggested by Alex at A View from the Bar, his BookTube channel, A View from the Bar. Some of you might remember in the late 1990s, he did an absolutely great series called Kingly Endeavors, in which he just analyzed the heck out of all of Stephen King's novels in chronological order. It was a great series. We all watched it and loved it. And he has largely abandoned it because he just doesn't have the time to set up his camera and talk about Stephen King for 20 minutes a week. Anywho, it's a fantastic idea. I should be grateful that in his hectic schedule he managed to come up with the idea itself. Anywho, I don't know why good booktubers stop booktubing. Don't make me come over there. So I want to start off by telling you about the books I read this weekend. Starting with what was certainly the best of them all, and I kind of sort of thought it might be some authors you just know, and it's this. It's the great. I have my trusty iPad here. It's The Great Shift by James Kugel. It's a study of how God went from being a person in the Bible, especially in the Hebrew Bible, to being an idea. How he went from being someone you could meet to someone you could only imagine, and that you could only ever experience telepathically, and usually only one way, unless you're of the small minority who believe that they're in constant personal, immediate, conversational contact with the Lord of the universe. And I would know if you were one of those people because you would self-publish a book and I would review it for Kirkus. So, and it was fantastic. The book was absolutely fantastic. This guy's never written a bad book. He takes his time to make sure they're great. So it was one of those rare instances, fiction or nonfiction, where I could go in saying, I am almost certainly going to be pleased. If I'm not, I will be amazed. And instead, I was very pleased. It was amazingly good. And it had the hallmark of all really great biblical exegesis, which that it sent me immediately back to the Bible. The reason I don't have the Bible on this list is because I just view it as atmosphere, as like breathing. So I would no more put it on the list than I would put, I don't know. I go back to things all the time. I have a core of about 100 books that I go back to all the time. It's like breathing. I don't really consider them part of a weekend's read. But I was going back, driven by his observations, I was going back to dozens and dozens of passages, and it was a ton of fun. I highly recommend it. In addition to being great and being exhaustive, he's also approachable in his prose style, which is not a lot of great biblical authors are. So you don't need to read anything else by him. You don't need any special preparation. You can just go straight into this, and you'll be glad you did. All the preparation, especially if you're, I assume the majority of my viewers are Christian. I assume the majority of his readers are Christian. Despite the emphasis in his own book. And if you're a Christian, all you need is what you learned in Sunday school. You'll just think about it differently, that's all. Like, for instance, in the 4 canonical Gospels, Jesus never meets God. They're never in the same room together, so to speak. It's just, I wholeheartedly urge you to put it on reserve at the library, or even, God forbid, buy it and read it, because you will love it. And then the next one was another religious thing. It's right at the top of my pile, so I went to it right away. It's Priest of Nature. And the author, Rob Elifi, does a fantastic job. Again, the book was a little dry and also a little prone to rabbit holes. So you have to if you read it, there'll be points where you'll be saying, in your head, you'll be saying to the author, can we move it along a little, see more here? I know you think this is interesting, but could you get back to... But only a few. And the subject itself, what I wouldn't give, the book is all about the enormous, obsessive quality of religion in Isaac Newton's life. We think of him, we associate him immediately with the basis of all Western science, but he himself was overwhelmingly obsessed with religion and had lots of ideas that would have got him burned at the stake had he promulgated them publicly, or at the very least would have had him completely ostracized from polite English society. And they become really interesting because those ideas, some are as prescient as his scientific insights to the modern day. Reading the book really made me wish there were a great big fat Penguin classic selection of the non-scientific writings of Isaac Newton. So there's a certain one of you who is watching this video and who is a publicist for Penguin. Kindly put in a word. That's what we need. It doesn't have to be Penguin, but you don't want somebody to beat you to the punch now, do you? I was reading along and I was thinking, what on earth? How fast would publishers stumble over each other to get a volume to press if it suddenly came to light that in his odd hours, Richard Dawkins had been filling page after page, notebook after notebook, with his analysis and thoughts on the New Testament. If anybody knew that such writing existed, and I don't know that it doesn't, but I bet it doesn't, if anybody knew that those writings existed, publishers would be jumping over themselves to get it into print. And yet, here's Isaac Newton, who does have those writings, and it would require critical apparatus, it would require a very good introduction. It's not for everybody. But when I read this book, I mean, I really liked it. The author is very strong on this particular aspect of Newton's life that he has chosen to pursue. And the more I read it, the more I thought this would only require a small amount of critical apparatus to make it accessible to a general public, and the general public would be interested. I'm hoping that it spurs that, but the book was top-notch. It won't do as an introduction to Newton, and it won't do if you haven't had an introduction to Newton. You couldn't really come to this book cold and say, okay, this is about the subtitle is The Religious Worlds of Isaac Newton. Okay, don't know anything about that, don't know anything about him, tell me. That won't really work. It's really not that kind of book. So bear that in mind if you're thinking about reading it. Then the next one is a made-up story. I mentioned it. I've mentioned it on this channel before. It's by J.P. Moninger, and it's The Map That Leads to You. I read the beginning of it and thought that it was just tooth-rotting schmaltz and extremely predictable and extremely manipulative. But I really kind of liked the spirit of it. I kind of liked how it was done, despite the fact that it was predictable and schmaltzy. And I was curious enough about that liking to want to read the rest of it, to want to see how it turns out. So I did. And, the template of the book is that a buttoned-up young woman meets a free-spirited man, or vice versa. In this case, it's that combination. And he opens up for her a vision of the future of her life that's drastically different from the carefully laid plans that she has in mind, and then they part ways. And you know the template of the kind of made-up story that I'm talking about. The template is the author keeps them apart, but is constantly vibrating them closer and closer and upping the tension on whether or not they'll meet again, whether or not they'll meet again at the right time, whether or not one or both will be irrevocably changed by the time they meet, constantly ratcheting up that tension. And then there's the meeting and the rest of the book. And the whole skill of, I mean, that's an absolutely tired plot line. When Shakespeare did it, his audiences at the Globe Theatre were rolling their eyes saying, oh, no, not this again. It's a very old and tired plot. And as with all old and tired plots, it only matters how well you do it. That's all that matters. And if you do it well, neither I nor anybody else that isn't a literary snob is going to care how old or tired the plot is. If you do it well, that's everything. That's the whole ballgame. And this author does it really well. I myself think that the delay and the hinted impediments thrown in the path of a happy reunion are just a bit on the much side. Those of you who've read the book, I don't know anybody, I don't think it's out yet, but when you read it, you'll see what I mean. It's not just distance that starts to be obstacles. Lots of other things conspire, and you don't know really what's going to happen. And when it finally does, when the conclusion finally happens, a large part of it is what you expect, but there were some elements that I didn't expect that I really liked, and some elements that I didn't expect that I didn't like, that made me sort of scrump my face in disappointment. And when I did that, I realized I'd become marginally invested in what was going on, which I didn't think it was going to happen. You know, you read a book like this, you keep it at arm's length, a little tang of cynicism, just because it's so manipulative. You don't want to be that guy at the 3-card Monte table who just can't figure out how it's done and loses all his vacation money. You don't want to be that person. So but some of it must have worked on me, because by the end I cared what happened, and I think you will too. No matter how tired you think the setup is, I actually do recommend this book. And then the next one, I don't know how I came to the next one. I read The Map That Leads to You. I finished it. I kind of liked the experience. I could definitely, if I still worked in bookstores, oh my God, there was a huge demographic chunk of incoming customers. I would go straight to this book. If they said, I'm looking for a recommendation, I want something good, something that will involve me, maybe something that's kind of sort of easy. I'm not really in the mood for, because I had regular customers who used to say to me, I know you love big fat biographies, and I usually go there with you, but I'm not in the mood. Do you have something easier than that? They knew, most of them had been dealing with me for years, they knew there was no shame. I'm not a book snob myself, and I wasn't a snobbish bookseller. I had plenty of colleagues who were. A customer was perfectly free to admit to me if they just didn't feel like doing the heavy lifting, and they knew perfectly well I was going to have lots of good recommendations at any level of exertion. And this book, oh my God, I'd have been recommending it to hundreds of people, and I think maybe something about that experience, about that the enjoyment of it, as opposed to, those of you who watch this channel for any length of time know, the made-up stories often exasperate me. I don't know if I've kept that a secret, but they often do. Often when I'm done with one, the first thing I want to do is cleanse my palate with some Ottoman history. But instead, when I was done with this one, I felt like reading more fiction. So I diverged from my plan for the weekend and picked up another novel. And it's this. It's one we've mentioned on this channel before. It's Live from Cairo by Cyril Bassington. And it's a debut novel about a young woman who goes to modern-day Cairo. And, the first 20 pages are all... The first 20 pages tell you pretty much the pace of the thing you're going to get and the density. Because our main character she isn't on the ground in Cairo more than 5 minutes before very adventure-y type things start happening to her that are meant clearly by the author, Gussie Finknottle, to be sort of the flavor of the modern Arab world. And I thought, I read the first 20 pages and I thought, okay, all right, well, that's going to go a long way. But then suddenly I was 150 pages in, and it was still doing that, still with that narrative density and pace, but I was loving it. I was absolutely loving it. And I was thinking back on other debut novels that I've read and thinking, God, don't they seem thin compared to this? Compared to how much work the author has put into this, into making it textured, into making it full in every paragraph. Even if some of the paragraphs are a little bit on the Edward Said, a little bit on the Orientalism view of the Arab world, some of the fish out of water characters are, as an old friend of mine used to say, I don't mind fish out of character waters, but I really don't like fishy fish out of character waters. And that's exactly what it felt like in the book. Some of the characters who were fish out of water felt a little fishy, a little fishily so. But even so, as a debut, a stunning achievement, and as an eye-opening experience. To one of those things that fiction does really well is to put you in a new world and make you breathe its atmosphere and make you abide by its rules while you're there. That's one of the things that fiction is wonderful at, and this does it fine. I highly recommend it. I forget, I have my iPad here, not the physical book, but the physical book is like Highway Robbery. It's like $30 for a hardcover of a debut novelist, someone who's totally unknown to you. So it's a total gamble, and I don't know that I can recommend you do that. But at the library, to test it out, absolutely. The only caveat I would say, since it's a debut novel, would be that if you get it from the library and you really like the first 30 or 40 or 50 pages, however long you consider is a fair amount of time, if you get to 30 or 40 pages like I did, or 60 or 70 pages, and you really like what you've read, my only caveat in this case, since it's a debut novel, would be that at that point you close the book, return it to the library, and buy a copy, new, from a bookstore. because we want these authors, we want good debut authors to write second books and third books and fourth books. So that would be my advice, but definitely give it a try. I know fiction tables and new release tables are just crowded with new stuff. This is the real deal, so I highly recommend it. And then more fiction, but this was a no-brainer. This is when we've seen it on this channel. This is Lady Be Bad by the mighty Megan Frampton, and it's the first in a series about a duke who has 5 daughters and needs to do something with them, needs to figure out something to do with them. One of them has made a disastrous life choice, ran off with a dancing instructor. Must never do that. And all the others feel like they have to compensate for that choice and the stain that is put on their family's good name by making very good marriages. And it's a quasi-regency. I say that because in quasi-regencies, the huge amount, there's not much about the Regency era that Megan Frampton doesn't know, take my word for it, but in quasi-regencies, huge amounts of that research goes out the window in favor of just a more broader based, more approachable, and blatantly more sexual approach to the Regency world than you would ever get from, Barbara Cartland or Georgette Heyer or anything like that. The women in quasi-regency historical romances get away with stuff that no woman would ever have even thought of at the time. And the key here, since I met a lot of these ladies at conventions and I've known a lot of them, and the key I want to stress is that they know what they're doing. If you read one of these things, if you're an aficionado of the world of Jane Austen and court, and you read one of these things and on page 5 you encounter an attitudinal anachronism, a character thinking in a way they never would have, well, you gotta stay your outrage for just a minute, because the author knows perfectly well that's there. They're designed to be sort of Regency fantasies rather than anything else. Like, for instance, starting with the very premise, a wealthy nobleman who had 5 daughters would have a very different approach to them than the wealthy nobleman in these books. I hope the series goes on to all of them, and I know that it will. This is the first in a series. I know that the rest of the series will go on to deal with each daughter in turn, and I'd be willing to bet it will become so popular that we'll get novels about a couple of their friends or maybe cousins, and I'm all for it. Because in terms of pure escapism, Lady Be Bad was wonderful. So let me show it to you again. This one is only a $7 paperback, so I don't feel so bad recommending it. But if you want to make the acquaintance of a quasi-Regency romance author that you're going to love, whose backlist you're going to want to go and find, you can't do better. Then we move on to nonfiction. This one was actually on my list. This was Private Government by Elizabeth Anderson, and it's about the new state of employers and how they seem to be all around. They seem inescapable in the modern business world, especially, but also in modern retail as well, where you can be notified at a moment's notice that a shift has opened up, or notified at a moment's notice that the shift you thought you were going to work has closed, and a bunch of other things too. Did you get that thing that I sent you? Do you have that thing that I need on Monday? I know it's Saturday morning, just checking to make sure you're on schedule. That sort of stuff that seems each one individually fairly innocuous, but that cumulatively, oh my God, the effect of this book is cumulative. The author does an incredible job, especially in such a short work. The book is tiny. I wished when I was reading it that it was much longer. She does an incredible job of showing how insidious this is and linking it to a whole bunch of other connected phenomenon. One I mentioned when I was looking forward to the book was the ubiquity of smart technology. Everyone is connectable all the time now. You're reachable all the time. And it's not just your private information, it's also your social media. A lot of companies today require that you disclose your social media. And they require it with the open admission that they intend to police it. Because if you put wiener pictures on your Instagram account, they want to know about it so they can fire you. If you're a 22-year-old young woman and you go to Cabo San Lucas for your vacation, your employer, who will almost certainly be a man, wants to know what you're putting on Facebook. and whether or not it's grounds to fire you. And not only does the book connect to things like that, it also connects to the evil side of the professional world these days, which is the total lack of security. You don't get, most of the time, you don't get your pension plan, your health benefits, all of that is up for grabs. There's no plus side, no invisible, unspoken contract on the plus side to balance all of this incredible negative stuff. And the only drawback that I found in the book, it's excellent. It's absolutely excellent. If you work, I don't, but if you do, if you work in almost any capacity at all, from retail all the way to Fortune 500 in management, you're going to want to read this book. And it's going to speak to you, and it's going to teach you things, and that's great. The only thing I would have wished for more of was more of the author. I know she was trying to create a Kinsey-style, objective look at what she's talking about. But the flashes of her insight that occur regularly throughout the book made me wish there was a lot more of it. I finished it wanting to know more of what she thinks of the subject, and especially what she thinks about where it's going. But even so, it was stimulating in a very negative way, but still stimulating. Then we just have a couple more to go here. This is the problem with Monday morning reports. I'll try and keep the next one brief. The next book is something that we've seen on this channel before. I already. Oh no, I lost it. No, there it is. I already recommended it. I've already read it. I reread it during the course of almost a whole day, pen in hand, to just sort of study it and really sift through its conclusion. That's Behave by Robert Sapolsky, and so it's not new to me, but I highly recommend it. I highly recommend that you read it. Not if you like Regency romances, not if you're in the business world, not if you have an interest in biblical exegesis. I highly recommend that you read this book if you're breathing and alive on Earth. Trust me, it's one of those books. It is endless, and it is amazingly thought-provoking on every single page. You really should. You owe it to yourself to read it. You don't necessarily have to buy it. I think it's a very expensive hardcover. But one way or another, you very much owe it to yourself to read it. It will throw open windows on your thought, your behavior, the thought and behavior of everyone you know, your world, your society, that you never thought to open. It's just an incredible book. It really is. And then the last thing that I want to report is another thing that I did for Friday Reads, and that's Heretics, which is basically a big graphic novel about the Enlightenment, about the first real wave of Western thinkers who dug into astronomy and what we could actually measure and what it might mean. What does it mean if we can demonstrably see that the Earth is not the center of the solar system, and that the Earth is not the only planet with a moon? What does that mean about everything? And what does it mean when we study the text that we have for the New Testament as text rather than as holy doctrine? What does it mean when we apply the techniques of humanism and textual analysis to these things that are supposed to be divinely inspired? And we see immediately that they're not. And what flows from that? What worldview comes from asking these questions? And this is the whole story of, the author calls it the beginnings of philosophy, but it's actually the beginning of modern thought, all aspects of modern thought. And the pictures are funny. The style the style of the illustrations is not weighty at all. Everybody has bug eyes. The visuals go for gags on their own, separate from the text, which means that this would be excellent for you to give to a teenager that you know, a teenager who's interested in, for instance, rebellious thought. Rather than let them learn the worst ways of doing that from their idiot friends when they're not around you, why not give them a book about the best ways to do that, about the history of rebellious thought, and especially that elusive category, teenage boys who don't like to read, but who are whip smart. If you happen to know one of those, this is the book. This is not anything they can dismiss. They're going to love it because every page of it has received wisdom, getting a kick in the you-know-whats. But they're going to remember it, too. because there's a huge amount of information here. That's the thing that really impressed me about it, is that it's crammed full of information, despite the fact that you can read it in half an hour. So these are all recommendations, as you can see. I have a feeling Monday Morning Reports will largely be recommendations, although I'm bound to hit duds. But I like to spend my reading time wisely if I can. And I also... I'm going to wrap it up with those books, but I wanted to end by saying, by asking if you like this, if this is a brand new feature, and I won't continue it if you think it's tedious. If you think the Friday Reads is enough, and you don't want the follow up, then I won't bother you with it. But if you do, I'd be happy to keep it up. I'd be happy to do this every Monday, in memory of A View from the Bar. May it rest in peace. 20 minutes a week. Don't make me come over there. Anyway, that's it for now. Some wonderful books to add to your incredibly Steve-inflated TBR. And I'll see you soon, Book 2. Thank you.